My name is Shilpa Vijayakrishnan, and I head the Education and Outreach Department at the Museum of Art and Photography, MAP Bengaluru. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this session of MAP Talkies, Once Upon a Song. Music and cinema have had a very long relationship, one that predates even the entry of sound into cinema, when pianists, organists, sometimes even live orchestras formed part of the viewing experience of the ostensibly silent film. With synchronized sound in cinema came new viewing experiences, background scores, original soundtracks, and of course, musicals. And since then, there has been no looking back. In India, we have had a long tradition of music being an integral part of our cinematic culture, used not only for mood and effect, but to create a sense of time, place, and cultural context. But perhaps most importantly of all, to express desires of all kinds, from those of the exile to those of the lover. Today, however, we're focusing not on the relationship that mainstream Indian cinema has with music, but on the work of three wonderful filmmakers whose less than conventional films take less than conventional approaches to music and sound as both subject and as tool of expression. It is my pleasure to quickly introduce our speakers and sort of kick off this session with them telling us a little bit about their journey and practice. For starters, we have with us today Simit Bhagat, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, a former journalist, and a social development practitioner. Simit left his full-time job with an international nonprofit to set up a creative agency for the third sector. He is also the founder of the Videsia Project, a not-for-profit initiative that works towards conserving and archiving folk music traditions from the Bhojpuri region. I'm going to leave it to him to tell us a little bit more about the project. And to sort of start off, we have a short trailer of In Search of Videsia, his award-winning film on the subject. Tell us a little bit more about how this project happened.
So first of all, thank you so much, Shilpa, for having me over and the MAP team. Started with film In Search of Videsia, and it was basically during one of my visits when I was working with a not-for-profit organization to a village. I actually came across like an entire playing this music. And until then, this was in teens. So generally, when you say Bhojpuri music or, Bhojpuri, the first thing that jumps to everyone's mind is, the sleazy songs that you hear. And that was also the impression that I had at that point. But later I discovered that there is actually a rich tradition, a rich folk tradition of folk musician, and this music, which is basically, which dates back to like centuries, because this is an oral tradition which has been passed on from one generation to another. And interestingly, a lot of these people, like the songs that they were singing, were songs of migration, songs of longing, songs of separation. And at a time when there was no cell phones or there was no like communication, the only way for people to really express themselves was through songs and was through music. And that was the start of my journey into this. And that's how my process of starting and thinking that, okay, this is a topic to make a film, it kind of started. And when I made the film, and while I was making the film, I realized that film could be in a sort of but profit initiative to kind of do this work in terms of systematically archiving this music, because unfortunately, because the music is oral tradition, the music in UP and Bihar, there are no written records of it. So unfortunately, a lot of music is getting extinct. So essentially what we are trying to do is we are systematically documenting this music before it goes extinct. So it's a film, but now it has grown into a larger kind of project. Project.
Thank you for sharing that, Sumit. Excited to delve into that a little bit more. But before that, I'd like to also introduce our second speaker for today. We have with us Surabhi Sharma, who is currently teaching at the New York University in Abu Dhabi. Surabhi has been an independent filmmaker since 2000, and she focuses on making feature-length documentaries and short films, which have, of course, been screened and awarded at several international film festivals. Her practice is primarily concerned with citizen transition, and especially explored through the lenses of labor, music, and migration. She has also worked a lot in the area of Vidisha music culture and Chakra music, and I'd like to invite Surabhi to tell us more herself about this.
Thank you, Shilpa, and thank you, Simit. It's a film I've been dying to see and somehow I've not had the opportunity. So I'll just speak about my journey and how I came to this moment of making Videsia in Mumbai. I made a film in 2007 called Jahaji Music, India and the Caribbean. And this was a film that I made, we were filming in Jamaica and Trinidad. And we were looking at the musics of the Caribbean, right? And now the important thing about the Caribbean is that it has a history of slavery, and then the abolition of slavery, and then the history of indentured labor. So slavery from Africa and indentured labor from India, right? So that history has, in a sense, in the context to creating music that is very unique to the Caribbean. And that's really the music public culture that one was trying to understand. One was trying to understand how music is the place where issues of gender, race tensions sort of play out. That film was not really only about the Indian in the Caribbean. The Indian in the Caribbean was actually Remo Fernandez, a pop music musician who we traveled with to these two islands and saw what was possible if people from the same colonial history spoke to each other through music. But that film really opened up ways of thinking through a couple of things. One was thinking through music and migration. The other was thinking about music and identity. The third was, how do you film music? As a documentary filmmaker, I hadn't looked at music before that. I was looking at very different kinds of issues before that. So these 4-5 things came together very interestingly for me. And after I completed that film, I was living in Bombay, and the Bhojpuri part of the chutney music that one, or chutney soca that one looked at in Trinidad, led me to thinking about exactly what Sim said, that Bhojpuri music has a deep and rich, long tradition, but more importantly, stories of migration are embedded in this music over a very long period in time that predates the time when indentured workers moved to, faraway islands, right, for a variety of reasons. So I got interested in that history, and because I was in Bombay, I decided, let me start looking at Bhojpuri music traditions in Bombay. Mumbai, a very important thing at that point in time that also, I had actually imagined I would follow up that story and from Bombay basically go to East UP and West Bihar. And I did start doing my research there, but I was also looking at Bombay. What happened at that point in time was that in Mumbai, Bhojpuri migrant workers were being attacked by the MNS and the Shiv Sena marginally, but largely the MNS, if you remember. This is 2008 or so. So Bombay sort of kept playing back in my head. I knew that the rich tradition was really what I would find in East UP and West Bihar. And I did do a lot of research on that to understand musical traditions that had not just gone to Trinidad, but had remained and how that had developed. But more and more, when I was looking for the music in Bombay, what I found, so I sort of delayed. I'm so glad Simit made that film, because now that burden is off me. But I thought my third film then would be in UP and Bihar. But I decided Bombay needed to be my second film. The reason being that while I was researching Bhojpuri musical traditions, what I found was, so where was I going to do that research? I was going to do that research by sitting at taxi stands, by meeting security guards, by going to the Dhobi Ghat, where all the Bhojpuri migrant workers are sort of concentrated, a whole host of clusters. And there I found, and you have to check on time with me, we might not be able to show the clip. There I found that the Bhojpuri folk tradition, which is what I was interested in, had actually just stepped over into a popular pop version of the same. The genres remained the same, the emotion remained the same, the shape of it, the instrumentation also largely remained the same, but the distribution, the performance, the articulation seemed to have changed. And I thought that was telling me a fantastic story, not just of Bhojpuri migrants, but a very important story about Bombay and Mumbai's relationship with its migrants, who are actually the ones who shaped that city. So that's how Videsia and Bombay was born.
मेरा नाम तो राम अनुज पाठक है, लेकिन जब हमारी कैसेट 97 में बनी थी, वो गाने इतने बढ़िया बने कि लोग बोले कि आपने तो एकदम पूरा बिखेर दिया, इसलिए आपका नाम हम आज से राम अनुज तो है ही है, लेकिन साइड में चिंगारी लिखेंगे। जब से मेरा नाम राम अनुज पाठक चिंगारी हो गया। भेजले नयापन कौनो सुधिया खबरिया, मनवा घबराला हमका, मनवा घबराला हमका, कुछ ना सुहाला, का बताई बतिया, हो का बताई बतिया, कर बैसैया के मोबाइल ना पठाई पतिया। राम अनुज सैया आई है उनके समझाइब, टाटा इंडिकाम वाली पीसिया मंगाइब, बिना का मोबाइल टाटा लागे नाही घाटा होई फ्री में बतिया, होई फ्री में बतिया, करबै सैया के मोबाइल ना पठाइब पतिया, करबै सैया के मोबाइल ना पठाइब पतिया.
So just to wind that up, so what I found was that not only had music crossed over into a popular realm in a sense, as folk music always is popular, but it had sort of allowed everybody to have a voice, very much like classical, like folk music does, right? So though instrumentation had changed and mobile phones had entered the songs and certain, dinjak beats had entered the song, it remained really what we call a folk tradition. So, so that's how the film happened, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. Very quickly, our final speaker for today, we have with us also Rima Das. Rima Das is the founder and producer of Flying River Films, which brings forth human stories that transcend the boundaries and create conversations. She really is like a one-woman show. She's, writing, directing, producing, editing, and doing the cinematography for her films. Two with her, award-winning films, Village Rock Stars and Bulbul Can Sing. The former not only won the National Film Award in 2018, but was also India's official entry to the Oscars in 2019. So thank you for coming on board, Rima. Welcome.
বলো মোৰ এখন সঁচা গীতাৰ হ'ব কেনেকৈ
এই ফেলা গাছত কিয় উঠিছিলে তই হা আপা চলিকাটা হিটি বেটি মগজ লাগেছ কত গেছিলে তই তামুল কেটাও পারবা না
আমি যে উঠিলো এডাল গাছৰ আধা গেছি দেখছা কাটি বন্ধ হ'ব লাগিব লাগিব ইয়াতে মুঠুৱাৰী নোহাৰ কাৰণে বানপানীতে আমাৰ দেউতা মৰিছে
So Rima, tell us about your journey and how you came about making.
I think from 2007 onwards, I started watching world cinema. So I was in Mumbai. I always wanted to be an actor. So that's how I was in Mumbai. I never thought that I'd become a filmmaker. But then it changed, like when I started watching European movies, like Asian movies, Iranian films, like it, and also some of our masters. Then it changed, and then I thought that I could also tell stories. And although I was not, I started making movies by my own, like I'm self-taught, and I was looking for acting job, I think quite around 6 years. So I didn't also, I thought like it's better to just go and just do it by my own. So I didn't assist also anyone. So the whole filmmaking journey is, you can say, organic, and thanks to the masters and contemporary filmmakers. Through them only, I actually learned making films. I was writing my first film, Man with the Binoculars, in Mumbai. Then I came to my village, and I made it, but somehow I was not that happy. I didn't feel free because not coming from school, uh, I felt limitations, and I was struggling actually. And then I decided to go my own, and fortunately I bought my own camera that time. Like this digital cameras were out, like, so I bought a Canon 5D Mark II, and it was kind of a best companion, and it gave me courage. So little I knew, so I can say that I came from nothing, and whatever I learned watching films, so I started experimenting. So actual journey started with Village Rock Stars. So, and also when I was back in my village and I was connecting with my roots that time, with nature also. And one day I spotted these children. They were performing in a local function with fake instruments, and they actually gave me courage. And also I thought, like, they were so much into it, they were so happy and looking, they were just celebrating life. And that's how I started thinking, like, if they can do it, why I cannot with limited resources. They don't have real instruments, but they are enjoying so much. So maybe I don't have uh, resources, but I have a camera, so I can probably do it. And that's how I cast those few of them. Then it just started, that just myself and my children. Then my cousin Malika, she was there assisting in every department, and it took us 3 years. And I can say that, yes, like nature, God, every elements helped us to make
Thanks for sharing that, Rima. I'm going to quickly invite both Simit and Surabhi to also turn their cameras on and come on. So I'm going to start with a very, very broad canvas here to talk about the fact that this festival, which is called Sound Frames, is really a reflection of the idea of bringing sound and the visual together. And of course, film is a medium that is truly audiovisual in that sense. So I wanted to kind of ask each of you just your quick reflections on the kind of choices that you've made as filmmakers when you're using visuals and music a certain way. Maybe we could start with you, Simit, and perhaps just, I know that you had done some research with archives in India when you were researching this whole culture of Videsya and Bhojpuri music and the folk traditions around it. So I noticed that there is some amount of like old photographs and archival material in your film. And I just was wondering whether you could reflect on the nature of that and why you chose to do it that way.
So I've used a lot of old visuals, like when people actually migrated. One good thing, I mean, like about the whole colonial system, was that they were very good in terms of documentation. They may have done, I mean, a lot of bad things that happened in India, but one thing that is really commendable is they have documentation for everything. So even when someone is actually sending people like from India to, let's say, Mauritius, they have detailed documentation of how much sugar that is being sent, how much chai pattis that is being sent, like everything is in a documented form, and it is still available in the archives. And so so one of the things that was also available is a lot of photographs of, of people migrating, people going, people in the ships, people, like in the colonies, how they were being given the wages. And when I could access that, I realized that that could be a very interesting, way to kind of include it in the film. Choice that I had to make, like, so how do you kind of incorporate how do you incorporate still for have that continuity so that it doesn't look out of the place. So the film has an entire 20 black and white, and which is only about like using old photographs and old visuals. Because I realized that there is no other way that you could have, and you could show the kind of pain, the kind separation that people were actually feeling, when people actually migrated at that time, and when the whole indentured migration was taking place. Just to kind of give, like, talk about, like, in a very nutshell, basically after slavery was abolished in Britain, there was a shortage of labor, and like the British colonial government needed people to work in their colonies, whether it was in Fiji or Mauritius, in the Caribbean, the world. And that is when they realized that they had some were forced, some were coerced, some were misled into believing that they would be, achhe din aayenge, and that's when in search of those good days, people left the country to work across the plantations across, so in those 100 years, nearly 2 million people, mostly from UP and Bihar, like from the Bhojpuri speaking region, they migrated to British colonies across the world. And when they migrated, like, they kind of possessions. So some people took Hanuman, people took, symbols like jhal, or some people took tabla, or, and a lot of these people, I mean, they took folk music along with them. And that's why you find folk music in different forms in various kind of colonies there. And a lot of this documentation is available in photographs. And I thought that would be like the best way to kind of showcase it, because it is difficult to create the whole scene on a limited kind of budget. So yeah, that was basically, where my motivation was to kind of incorporate these visual elements into the film.
So just sort of segueing from that to you, Rima, because Simit was talking about the photographs actually presenting the context and giving a sense of the feeling for what people have been going through or people might have felt in this time. I wanted to just quickly ask you, I was reading about how there is no background score in Village Rock Stars, right? And I was thinking about the idea that there's a lot that has been said about the poetry of the visuals in your film and the landscape, and how that is giving a certain sense of emotion, a certain sense of context. So was there a specific reason that you went in that direction and chose to, deliberately avoid having a background score or adding to that layer?
Actually, it was quite spontaneous because the process of making Village Rockstars was very organic. And I didn't pre-decide that I don't want a background score for Village Rockstars. But for a long time, I was in Mumbai, and when I was back in my village, so all the locations, it's a kind of virgin locations away from city noises. And I found so silences and the sound of nature quite soothing and immersing, and also it had a calming and healing effect on me. So when during the time of edit, when I saw how the film was shaping up, then I felt like that I didn't want to, disturb the film with studio produced background score. I really like the rhythm, like natural sounds. So that's how I decided, and I thought that the way I was reconnecting with my roots and nature, especially, that and it was healing me. So I thought it might also, it might heal the others and audiences. So, and also whatever I was experiencing, so I wanted to give it to the audience. So it was that simple. Yeah. Yes.
So, Surabhi, just to again continue off what Rima was saying, right? To give the audience an experience that you are experiencing. So, how does that work when you are documenting live performances? How does that work when you're documenting a tradition that is already a performance in itself?
So for me, because I'm a documentary filmmaker, it gives me great joy to sort of take what is in front of me. But then when I'm editing is where, so I don't want to bring in any other sound, but I want to work with this sound and sort of sometimes fictionalize the sound, so because I was looking at not just performances, I was looking at music recordings, music performances, and a spectrum of performances on that absolutely small makeshift stage for Ganpati at the auto stand, to the big Chhat Puja stage at Juhu Beach, sort of funded or sponsored by politicians and companies. For me, they were all very interesting. But now these different locations or spaces where, or even a makeshift studio in a tiny little room in a slum versus a fancier studio, versus someone at home, sitting at home and writing his song, or singing it into his mobile phone to send it to his friend who is a producer. So all of it was of interest to me. But all of it for me, it was, of course, the song, the music was important, but where that music is happening is equally important, which is why in the clip you saw, for me, the turning of the pages of this man sitting alone to, because he is a taxi driver, to him driving his taxi with the rain, and the song, the song changes its feeling and meaning when you take it from a room into the taxi onto the stage. So for me, sound and music have the same role, and sound and music for me are not secondary to the image. In fact, more often than not, they motivate the image, or sometimes the image is telling me something and the sound is not, and I work with the sound, so for me, it's like I have music, I have sound, I have image, and I have the cut. So these four elements are telling the story. The story is not outside of this. That's how I work, and that's how my films on music have led me to start thinking about, how can the musical structure or the musical impetus shape the nature of my film.
No, I think that's a great way to put it, right? The idea that all these elements actually they come together rather than being one tacked on to another. But I also thought what you were saying about spaces and the circuits that music and sound can occupy being something quite interesting to explore. Simit, if you've already touched upon the idea of the historicity of the tradition and indentured labor. But what do you see as the value of this context? Or what is the need for us to talk about this in Bhojpuri music today?
Yeah, I think, so while we know about like the largest migration that happened, like the migration that happened during the partition with India and Pakistan, right? There is not much that is known about the migration, which is one of the largest again in Indian history, like indentured migration. And not many people know about it. In fact, we don't talk about it in our history books. There are not many records of it. It is probably because it happened like much before the independence, and the focus of our history books remained, on getting kind of independence. And because the process of indentured migration ended somewhere in 1917, which is nearly 30 years before independence, I think somewhere this history kind of got lost in a way. And that's why, and while, you know, there may be some books, you know, here and there, and some like academic, you know, writings about this, but in the popular culture, we don't know much about the indentured history. So I think it is important to kind of talk about this history, because this is I mean, this is the connection that we have with so many diaspora countries, right? And music is the one thing that is kind of binding us together. You imagine there are so many countries, more than 15 countries, and we are all linked with these countries, whether it is Fiji, it is Mauritius, whether it is South Africa. These are countries which are, you know, miles apart, right? But there's one common thing that we have with these countries is the musical connect that is there. Which is basically based in, like, which is rooted in the Bhojpuri culture. So while the form of Bhojpuri music would have changed in the Caribbean, let's say, but the roots are very much from India. And I think this is a very important kind of connection that we have with so many countries. And that's why I think it is important to kind of, you know, talk about this part of history. Because at the end of the day, there are so many, I mean, nearly 2 million people, as I mentioned earlier, migrated, and they went through a very difficult time. And, you know, the whole journey, which started from the port of Calcutta to reaching to some of these countries, which took more than 100 days. And imagine, like, people not knowing where they are going or where they are being taken. They are not even sure about how many days it is going to take to kind of reach a certain location, and being cramped into, you know, a small space for, like, you know, more than 3 months. So I think it's important to kind of know about this part of history as well.
Surabhi, what would be your take on this, especially as someone who's looking again at migration, but a different context of migration and Vidisha culture within that?
So as Simit said, there's no question of it. This is a very important part of our history. It needs, Jahaji music, India and the Caribbean led me to really think about. I was a Bombay resident. I had always, you know, heard Bhojpuri music around, but it was my journey to the Caribbean and to understanding that history that led me to pay attention and to listen, right? Like Simit, there was this idea of the music, you know, being somehow only vulgar and crass. Going to the Caribbean, seeing how sexuality plays out in the music, made me really think about so many of our folk traditions, and not just Bhojpuri, whether it's Haryanvi, it's Punjabi. There's so many folk traditions where we celebrate sexuality not just in its very sophisticated poetic form, but sexuality in its very raw, in your face, almost subversive form, right? So there are these traditions, and I wanted to sort of really think about that rather than just block all popular Bhojpuri music as something that's crass. Bollywood is constantly stealing from Bhojpuri music, right? And Bollywood's doing it, but somehow that is not vulgar, in spite of the music being item songs in Bollywood. But when a Bhojpuri singer sings his song or her song, then suddenly we are like, have these huge moralistic problems with it, right? So there was a lot of churn going on at that time. And for me, it was very important to sort of step into. I really think that it was 2 years of research before I was able to go to the Caribbean to shoot that film. That really opened up as different, as Simit said, a different understanding of our colonial history. It's not as if the story of migration ended with colonialism or independence. It continues. Every city in this country is built by migrant workers, and a really large section, whether it is building roads in Ladakh, or building roads in Manipur, or it is being security guards in fancy gated communities of Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore. So it is a history. It's a contemporary history that needs to be studied. It's a present that needs to be studied.
So, Rima, I wanted to move a little bit away from these conversations that that Simit and Surabhi, or these questions that Simit and Surabhi have initiated about migration towards what's on the opposite end of the spectrum, and rootedness and localness in your work. So I wanted to ask it's a sort of two-part question. One where the idea that the village itself seems like a central character in film, and this is something people often say about films that are based on certain cities, but this seems to be true of village rock stars. And was this something intentional, deliberate, or just a matter of chance? And I also wanted to ask, because it is also a place that you once called home, how easy or difficult did it make that process of shooting in a place that was once home?
Uh, when I'm making films, if it is a village or city, or if it's a local street or shop, it's like I like to observe. It is not deliberately, but I like to live as it is. Like I like, and I like to bring the details. So it is. I don't do it deliberately, but I don't like if it is a village or a city, just to use it as a mere background, just as a backdrop. So it is also part of the story. So that's how probably you see my village also in the film as a character. And also being home, definitely, because it helped me immensely. uh, when it took 3 years to make Village Rockstars, and then Bulbul Can Sing, it took 1 year, and also now I have been making my new film like it more than a year now. So when you are shooting such a long duration, like the time, long time, then being home around, it immensely helped. And also it helps me because it helps me to think and rethink, then go back and forth. And I like to do that because I mostly, when I'm making my own films, I don't like to just I don't work with a bound script. So I always have my story, I have a structure, but I keep breaking it also, and I like to develop it. It's a process for me, it's organic process for me. So it really helps me. And when I'm home, because it is quite uh, comfortable, you can say. I can eat home cooked food, I can be close to my characters, and I can discover also. And whenever I need something, then I know the people around, so they always support and help. There are challenges, because the way I am passionate making movies, I love cinemas. So the people I'm working here, so sometimes they're casual, they don't understand. So I face little small things, like it's sometimes what happened during the time of Bulbul and even Village Rockstars, that I was traveling around like with Village Rockstars. I was traveling to festivals, and during the time I was shooting Bulbul Can Sing. And only for 3 4 days, 5 days, I used to travel from Bombay to Assam, and I reached and I realized that Bulbul, my character, she would like she applied mehendi on her hand, and you will find like that someone had the haircut, then Bulbul's like opposite, the who was playing as her boyfriend, she just shaved his hair. But definitely, like being home, like Surabhi knows, Simit knows, like because my film style is also kind of a fiction and like documentation. So definitely being with my people and characters and in that location around, it helps a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
So Simit and Surabhi, I'm going to throw open this question to the two of you as well. What were your trials and tribulations like when you were shooting these projects as people who are also outsiders from the, to the communities that you were documenting? And, how does that play in with your responsibilities as documentary filmmakers to, within quotes, accurately represent a community or a culture?
I can go first, Simit, if you want. Okay. So, so for me, yes, of course, the responsibility becomes that much more loaded, right? One, who am I to represent someone else? So that's a key question. And that question should never leave you. It does not leave me ever. Having said that, while I carry that question deeply, I don't feel burdened by the question to retreat. Difficulties is very simple. When I was doing Videsia and Bombay, I was a woman. I was a woman with a Brahmin name. It had never occurred to me how important that was or a disadvantage that was, right? So every time I went and I wanted to understand all kinds of music, I didn't want only the sanitized kajri. I wanted all kinds of kajri. I wanted all kinds of dhobia geet. I wanted all kinds of I wanted the whole spectrum. But wherever I went and whoever I asked, they only wanted to sing me Devi Geet. So that was really difficult. Plus, all these spaces that I went to were completely male spaces. I went to performances with 20,000 people in the audience, all male, right? So me and my assistant were the only two women other than the dancers on stage. So that has its own set of limitations, but they're not limitations enough if I'm not blind to the fact that I carry my difference, my class, my caste, my gender, that is coming in the way. Then there is a way to sort of work with it. From that end, it's not as if I was kept out. I had to work on building trust for people to sort of accept that maybe I might want to know more than they think is right for someone like me. So it's a for me, that is really the rich experience. Rima's films are so beautifully anchored in the place that she knows well, and that detailing she doesn't even have to think about. It's just there. It's what's telling the story. It's what makes it so beautiful. I don't have that detailing, so I have to then do the work because I realize the absence of it. I realize the lack of it, and that's then my work and my research. Of course, I will never make a film that, let's say, a Bhojpuri woman without upper caste surname would make, right? And I look forward to and that film is way more important than any film I will ever make. But does not mean that I need to then only be restricted to my, boring, cushy life, or maybe not boring, interesting to some, but not to me somehow. So I guess but one has to be aware. One has to be really aware, and one can't just assume that I can speak for someone else and I will always be correct in representing. I've had lots of pushback on Videsia and Bombay from a lot of friends who are deeply embedded in Bhojpuri folk traditions. And they were outraged with my film because they said I didn't show the real folk tradition, the pure folk tradition, and I showed this horrible city rendition of it. And I disagree with them. I disagree very respectfully, but I completely disagree. There is that and there is this, and I don't see why one should be valued more and one less.
As Surabhi rightly mentioned, so generally when you travel in these paths, and people ask you for their name, someone who's born and brought up in a city like Bombay, these are the things which never, you don't face them, in general. You have never kind of grown up with these things and with these questions. But when you travel to UP, when you travel to Bihar, and when people ask you your name, they don't want to know your first name. They want to know your last name, and because that's how you are going to, like, the next treatment that will follow will be will be based on what your answer is going to be. So it's very interesting, and this is something that even kind of I faced. For me, in terms of, while I was an outsider, but for me this was more like the film, like the journey with this film. It was more about like trying to basically trying to find answers to my curiosity, because the first time that I had heard this music, I had never heard about this music and what they were singing, which was Bhojpuri folk. And that music somehow had stayed with me. I continued with my job and all of that. And it was much later, like about 4-5 months back, that music had stayed with me. And I wanted to know I wanted to know more about that music, because I listen to a lot of music. I listen to world music. I listen to different kinds of music, and even folk music within India, be it Baul Sangeet or music from Rajasthan or Gujarat. But I had not come across really about like music from this region. So I was basically just curious to know what this music is about, and why a whole entire village is able to sing, or play some of the other music instruments. So I was absolutely curious about where this tradition is coming from. So for me, like the first trip that I did, which was basically a solo bike trip across UP and Bihar, about 1,200 kilometers, basically landing up in different villages, trying to identify folk musicians or people who could talk about this music. So for me, it was about like finding answers to my curiosity. And interestingly, a lot of newer generation people, like within these villages, they did not have access to this knowledge, or they did not know much about it. So when a village elder would start talking about this music, or talk about different forms of whether it is different genres of music, whether it is Kajri or Beha or Jatsar, like the younger generation would be equally curious, because they had many of them had no idea about this rich tradition. So for me, it was about like figuring it out, finding answers to my curiosity. And interestingly, now that the film has kind of taken a different shape, it has moved on to a larger kind of archiving project. And the kind of responses that we get today, on our YouTube channel and on various social media, is a lot of people who are like native Bhojpuri speakers. They don't speak, or they don't want to be associated with Bhojpuri. Many of them, especially the ones who live in large cities, because like when they say us, or when they associate themselves with Bhojpuri, they are kind of looked down upon. And people feel in a way embarrassed, kind of accept that their mother tongue is Bhojpuri, which I feel is a real shame, because languages and culture and folk traditions, they take hundreds of years to develop. And this region has a beautiful tradition which goes back many hundreds of years. And I feel it is really unfortunate that it has come to a position where people are finding it embarrassing in a way, to say that okay, this is my language or this is my culture, because the popular culture is like as Surabhi mentioned, it is associated with the whole kind of vulgarity. So yeah, I feel, although I was an outsider, but I feel it is like if you're passionate about something, which like Surabhi has done through a work, and we are doing through the archiving music. I don't think it is while yes, it is, you have that added advantage when you are like based there, but I think when you're coming from a different place, like you look at things in a very different perspective, and you don't necessarily have those judgments that people themselves have when they are looking at their own mother tongue, or when they are looking at their culture. So I think it does have its own kind of pros and cons.
Certainly, there are, I think, different perspectives when you're an insider to something and outsider, which is, I guess, Rima's work also exemplifies on the other side of the spectrum. Just to wrap up our conversation today, I want to go back to the kind of role that music and sound has played in these films that we've been talking about. And so I'm going to sort of start with you, Rima. If you can just talk about how you see music as part of how you tell the story. And certainly in Village Rockstars, where music is kind of aspirational for the protagonist, right? And something that she's dreaming about. Is it something that you see as a metaphor or a symbol, or how do you process that?
I see music in everything. It's just like when you are making a movie, when you are writing, when you are shooting, it's like even when you are editing, that rhythm is there. It's like music is there. And now when I am saying local stories, and I discovered it just spontaneously came to me. The way I am the way like music is there in my films, it's always organic and spontaneous. I never planned it. I mentioned earlier also, if it's not going well, background score, then I prefer the way it is, so the just the sound playing the music. And also I mostly with the like instruments, it's live music, it's not recorded later in the studio. Whatever I preferred like that. And later, if I make a horror film, if I make a different genre film and period drama, then might be things will be different. But when I am with people, like I like that minimalistic thing. And as you mentioned that in Village Rockstars, is dream metaphor is a reality. These children, they are from village and they have limitations. They are playing music with these fake instruments. So for them, like the fields are the place where they are performing, they are humming, they are singing, like, so it's their reality. It's a metaphor also, but it is their reality. If the film is based in a city, and most of the city, like I see, if they are coming from that kind of background who can buy real instruments, then things will be different.
I love your philosophical take that music is in everything, right? It's in all moments.
Yeah.
So, Surabhi, about what do you think in terms of when you are documenting a musical tradition? So Rima is talking about music as choice, where you choose to add it or not, to create meaning a certain way to the story. But when the story you're trying to tell is in itself of music, how is the constant evolution, its attempt to change with times, how is that something that we're able to incorporate?
So as I mentioned before, and actually following on what Rima said, so my story is about the music. So then my filmmaking has to draw from that. So music, just though it is the subject of the film, but it has to also influence and inform the structure, the approach, filmmaking, edit, everything, right? I can't treat music as text or music as dialogue. Now I will show you this kind of song. Now cut to this kind of, the music has to then really inform, and there is something called a musical structure, and that musical structure has to seep into your film. It's exactly what Rima said. Music is everywhere. It is in the way you edit. It is in the way you frame. It is in the way your camera moves or does not move. So all these are very important choices that are making you pay attention to the sound. I was really delighted that Rima was part of this conversation, because something that I really value in her films is a certain sense of musicality. Even though music might not be there, but there's a musicality with which she's working. The moment there is a girl aspiring to be a musician, then the musicality of the place has to come into her expression and the filmmaker's expression. It's my 4th film on music. I'm working on my 5th, and now there is no set way in which the film has to be made. The film has to take from the music. In this particular instance, in all the Bhojpuri music performances that I've filmed, there is part of that performance is people coming and giving money or giving a garland. And then you stop singing, you announce that so-and-so has given 25 rupees. So I realized that I could have easily cut that out and kept the music continuous, but that made no sense. So I actually used those moments of interruption as the way to actually structure the whole film, that my film is just made up of interruptions. I don't let anything fully develop. I move away, I come back to it, so for me, it works in that sense.
So one of the things about, my film as well is the sounds that have been used. Those are basically sounds from the field. So if basically, essentially what I'm trying to kind of communicate is, even if there may be I've also tried to use like poetry or lyrics of some of these songs, and the background music or the background is basically like you kind of, essentially what I've tried to do is give the feeling of, if there is a pain of separation, then how do you kind of communicate that through sound? And that's basically, that's obviously like a continuous kind of process that you had to kind of like do as a filmmaker, as to what would be the perfect kind of sound, or how do you give a sense of the place, give a sense of that feeling of hollowness or feeling of sorrow through music and through visuals. So yeah.
Thank you, Rima, Simit, and Surabhi. I feel like we've come a little bit full circle with that. The idea of how does music really shape how we emote and how we feel when we're watching films as well, among just general experiences of listening to music. Thank you also to Anand for so patiently signing for us for today's session. It was a pleasure to speak with all three of you, and I really look forward to all of your next projects. I'm very excited to have you on board. Thank you for taking the time out.